5 lessons I learned after doing 100 podcast episodes. So guys, I finally made it to episode 100. Man, can I get some bells and whistles? Can I get some claps, some applause? Guys, this has been a journey. And the reason why it's been a journey is because I don't like being on camera. It sounds crazy, right? I don't like being on camera. I never really been the one to speak in front of large crowds. And honestly, to this day, I'm still very much an introvert, meaning after I go out and have fun with a group of people, I'm in my house for like the next 3-4 days, sometimes maybe in the next 2, I would say maybe 2 weeks, if you will. I'm not gonna say 3 weeks, that's kind of pushing it. But I'm an introvert, guys, and I wanted to show you guys that you can do podcast episodes, you can do video content, you can do social media content, and still be an introvert. You can do this stuff. It doesn't matter where you started. It doesn't matter what you've been going through or anything like that. And what I want to show you guys are the 5 lessons that I've learned throughout this podcast journey. Now, as I was stating, growing up, I've always been an introvert. Guys, I'm one of 5. You know, I've always been someone who kind of stayed in the background, someone that actually never really had that confidence that he loved, at least when I was growing up. And I'll even be honest, even throughout this podcast journey, there were times where I didn't feel confident. Somehow, some way, I was still able to get up and do these podcast episodes. And I want that to be a sign of encouragement to you. So with that being said, guys, I'm going to the first point. But before I do, make sure you subscribe to this channel. So as I go into these points, these are not points that I learned from just doing podcast episodes, but these are points about life in general, okay? I want to make this known that when you show up like I have with these podcast episodes, it's going to help you to show up. It's going to help me to show up in other aspects of my life because there's something that I've created within myself. I've created a habit, a system, a way of thinking, beliefs, a growth mindset, so many different things. And that's why I was on this journey. I wanted to become someone that could accomplish the goals that I had for my future self. Now that I feel like I'm becoming that person, it's going to make it easier for me to grab these goals off the shelf. When I'm that person, it's going to make that path a little less daunting. But if I never become that person, it's going to be very hard to grab these goals off that shelf and put them in my pocket to take the awards and the rewards that I'm looking for. Okay? So again, that's why I wanted to do this. So with that being said, point number 1 is to make it simple. Guys, when I first started doing podcasts, guess what I was doing? I was making it very difficult. I got me a Sony camera. I got me a tripod. Man, I was trying to do the most. There were even times where I went into studios and shot episodes. But the thing about that was that it was so hard to get it started that every time I was about to shoot another podcast, I didn't feel like doing it because it was such a heavy lift to get the podcast going. So it was hard. You know, when you're going through all those, like changing the camera, changing the lenses, changing the batteries, changing how you're setting it up, it wears on you. But when you have a system, right, a simple system, it makes it easier for you to go from start to finish. That's what we want to look for. When it comes to your goals, when it comes to your habits and your routine, I would tell you, strip all the complexities out of it. Make it as simple as possible and build from there. Don't start off on level 10 in terms of complexity, especially if it's something new, because that's only going to guarantee that you're not going to finish. Now, trust me, you're going to start off just like I did, but can you keep up with that intensity over a long course of time? Probably not. A great quote by James Clear, who is the author of Atomic Habits. He says that you should focus on consistency rather than intensity when you're first starting out. So find something, find a range, whatever it is, that you can repeatedly do over and over and over again. If you want to start losing weight, if you want to start hitting the gym, I would tell you, start off by going to the gym maybe for 30 minutes, right? You don't have to be in the gym for 2 hours or 2.5 hours like some of these other guys, right, that are training for, let's say, competitions and things like that. No, that's not you, right? But it can be, especially if you go from day 1 and you make it to, let's say 100, if you will, just like I did in this podcast. You can get there, but you have to make it simple to begin. And you can take that and you can apply it to every aspect of your life. The second lesson that I learned, I needed to become connected to my future rather than my present. I needed to be focused on where this podcast is going, not where it's at. Because here's the thing, there's been podcast episodes that I've posted that has gotten 0 likes, that has gotten 0 views, or maybe it's gotten 1 view. And there's a lot of those. But I said, you know what? I'm not focused on the, let's say, the pretty likes, or let's say the superficial like data, if you will. I'm more so focused on building a skill within me, a skill of storytelling, a skill of communicating, a skill of public speaking, all these different things. Because these are the skills that I'm going to use when I get on those big stages, when I get those big opportunities. But I need to craft them now. I need to get ready for when that time comes. And if I'm not focusing on that at this moment, I'm going to be in it for the wrong reasons. Every time I look at a video and I see, man, it didn't get any views, I put my best stuff in it, it's going to crush me. But that was never my focus. And I don't want that to be your focus. Guys, I need you to let go of where you are today. I need you to let go of where you were in the past. And I need you to get very focused on where you're heading in the future. When you do that, you'll find yourself motivated. You'll find yourself moving with a sense of purpose. You'll find yourself feeling free of any, let's say, circumstances, any, let's say, mistakes that you may be currently making, any situations that you may be in right now. You find yourself letting go of that because you're not focused on who you are today. You're moving as if you're already that person into the future. You're moving as if you're that podcaster, if you will, that has 1 million subscribers, right? You're walking as if you're that YouTuber that has 1 million subscribers, like a Mr. Beast, if you will. That's what you want to do, okay? And also, let's face it, you're not going to be great at the beginning, right? You're not going to be great at the beginning, but you can become great. That's the thing that separates people from starting and the people that are still procrastinating. The people that are still saying, yeah, I'm going to start that podcast next week, next year, whatever the case may be, and they haven't done it. This is because they believe that they have to be great to begin. No one has been great when they started. No one. Not Michael Jordan, not Kobe Bryant, who's sitting behind me, none of these guys. But if you're willing to put in the work, you can one day become great. Lesson number 3 that I learned, having a system makes hard goals easy to accomplish. Guys, I want to read some stats for you. So 90%, and I got these stats from Forbes magazine and from Medium. So 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. That is crazy, right? 90% of podcasts don't make it past episode 3. What does that tell you? That should tell you if you just show up, you should be successful. You'll be more successful than 90% of the people that are in your field. And all you got to do is show up. That's it. I'm going to give you some more stats. So for the remaining 10% that did get past episode 3, 90% of those people, they don't make it to episode 20. So if you get to episode 21, you are effectively in the top 1% of episode podcast producers. So the biggest thing that's stopping these people is the fact that they don't have a system. And also one of my previous points is that they're not focused on the future. They're not focused on a vision. They're just focused on how I look. Am I getting likes? Do people think my content is good? All those things that don't matter at the end of the day, all right? But if you have a system like I did, it will make your dreams a lot easier to accomplish. So I'll give you an example. When I started doing podcast episodes, like I said, I had this elaborate setup, right? I had these cameras, I had these mics. I tried to do all this stuff, and it didn't go well. I couldn't sustain it. So I made my setup simple, and then I made the process after I finished the podcast simple as well. So what I did was I went to Canva and I created one thumbnail, and all I did was just change the title in that thumbnail. I didn't change anything else, right? I did change the image of me, but the background stayed the same, all right? And what happened was I was able to create a thumbnail in sometimes like 5 minutes. Create it, boom, post it, and I'm done. Also with the YouTube description, I had a process with that. So I would go on ChatGPT and I would copy and paste the exact same prompt every single time, and I would just change the title, right? I'll tell it, do this task again, but make it about this episode, right? This title, if you will. And it will print it, and I'll copy and paste it and post it, right? Real simple. Also, the days that I shot my podcast was something also that I made very similar, very similar. If I did not do my podcast episodes on the weekends, it just wasn't getting done. So I had to make sure that I did that as well. So think about it. All you gotta do is make 21 episodes in order to be in the top 1% of all podcast creators. And there's easily over 2 million or millions of podcasts that are out there, but only 1% of them can make it to episode 21. It doesn't sound hard, does it? But it is hard when you don't have a system. Now, a system doesn't have to be something that's complex, right? And I talked a little bit about this already. There's a good chance you have systems in your life already, you just don't know it. One of your systems may be you and your best friend going to the gym together to make sure that you're both going to the gym, right? Maybe you waking up every morning, writing your to-do list. Yeah, that's a system as well. You can also find different apps to incorporate into your systems to make it easier. For me, that's ChatGPT and Canva, right? Makes it real easy for me. You can also hire people. You can hire a coach. There's so many different things. It just doesn't have to be as hard as you think that it is. So again, all you gotta do is show up and you're easily better than 90% of the competition. And if you show up just a little bit more, you'll be better than 99% of that competition. So hearing that, I would tell you, don't worry about if your podcast is good right now. And again, that's just a metaphor that I'm using. So what I'm trying to say is, don't worry if you're not good at whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish right now, right? Your skill set will get better over time. You just have to be willing to give yourself that grace in order to get better. All right, lesson number 4. The discomfort of doing podcast videos may not go away, but what's important is the impact that it's making. So guys, even on podcast episode 99, right? I wouldn't say I feel uncomfortable right now because I'm a little excited that I made it to 100. But even on podcast 99 or 98 or some of my recent podcast episodes, guys, trust me when I say I still felt a little uncomfortable. But what's crazy about that is that people are still coming up to me and saying, Coach Wells, your podcast is amazing. When's the next one coming out, right? There's still people subscribing and watching my videos, even though I feel a little uncomfortable. And as a matter of fact, there was one day that I did not feel like shooting a podcast. I absolutely did not feel like doing it. But somehow I found the script within myself to get up and just do one podcast episode. And believe it or not, that one podcast episode to this date is the best podcast episode that I've ever made in terms of the views. Now, think about that, guys, right? Think about that. You can feel uncomfortable and still put out a great product. The issue is that we think that we have to feel comfortable, we have to feel confident, we have to feel motivated before we take an action. We sometimes think we have to feel good in order to get good results. That is not the case. You could literally start right now in all your discomfort, in all your self-doubt, and do a really great podcast. And guess what? People will thank you for it. People will even pay you for it. And you could do this while feeling uncomfortable. And if I had to ask you, what's more important, feeling comfortable or making a difference? You would probably say making a difference. I can also say what's more important, feeling comfortable or confident or having a successful podcast. You'd probably say having a successful podcast. That's what I want you to think about. I want you guys to think, what is the most important thing when it comes to this podcast episode that I'm doing, right? This podcast show. You would probably say the things like helping people, right? Getting out information that's valuable for my listeners, all these different things, right? Maybe even creating another stream of income for yourself. But what's important isn't feeling comfortable. And that right there tends to get in our way. So again, a lesson that I learned during this process, during this journey, is that, hey, you may always feel uncomfortable, but that part doesn't matter so long as you're doing your stuff, so long as you're still accomplishing your goals. And then lesson number 5, the final lesson, and before I give it, make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you get more information like this. So lesson number 5, an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. And that's Newton's first law. So what does that mean? What did I learn as I went through my podcast journey? Guys, during that journey, there have been times where I had really great stretches, where I was very consistent. And if you actually stop and look, you'll see that there's a big gap around episode, ironically, 21 or 22, where I went maybe like a year or two without posting a podcast episode. And what happened was I got a little rusty and I had to build the momentum back up. But once I built that momentum back up, I was able to do podcast episodes a little bit easier, especially when I found a system that worked for me. And even throughout that journey, so when I went past episode 22 and I started to hit the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s and 60s, there may have been days where, hey, I didn't feel it, right? There may have been a week or two where I didn't record a podcast episode. And because of that, when I came back to the mic, I didn't feel as comfortable. I didn't feel as confident. So in those episodes, what I did was I decided to do a quick episode, something small, something to at least get a check mark on the board. And what's funny is when I did that, literally the second and third podcast that I did that day felt so much easier. But it's because I got the momentum going. And I can see what happens when the momentum is stopped. It can take a lot to get it back going. Like I said, I stopped, 2 years went by, and now I'm back on this train. Could you imagine where my podcast would have been if I didn't stop? And I'll tell you to imagine the same thing for yourself. So imagine where, let's say, your bank account would have been if you invested, like ever since you, let's say, turned 18 and you started working a job, right? Or let's say, imagine where your stocks would be if you invested in Apple, let's say 10 years ago, right? Sometimes we know what we need to do, but to do it consistently is where the issues lie. I can even say going to the gym. There have been times where I'm sure you've gone to the gym for a consistent stretch of time, and then you stop. And you may have stopped for maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe a year, and then you decided to get back on that train. Imagine where you would be, where you could have been if you never stopped, right? So we want to make sure that we're not cutting off that momentum, because it's going to take a little bit of effort to get it started. But once you get it started, trust me when I say, you will find enough energy to keep you going for a lifetime, okay? And that's what I want to say about this podcast journey that I'm on. Now that I'm on episode 100, I have enough skin in the game to keep me in this for life. So trust me when I say, there's going to be an episode 200, 300, 400, episode 1000. It's eventually going to get there. And it's because I broke that glass ceiling of making it to episode 21, as I said earlier. So I want to summarize these top 5 lessons that I learned as I made it to episode 100. So again, the first one, guys, you got to make it simple. You do not need an elaborate setup. And again, these lessons, yes, I'm talking about my podcast journey, but you can apply this to life. The second lesson I learned was to become connected to the future and not the present. It's not about who you are today or who you were. It's all about where you're going. Lesson number 3, having a system is key to making hard goals easier to accomplish. That's why only 1% of all podcasts make it past episode 21. Lesson number 4, the discomfort of doing podcast videos may not ever go away, but what's more important is the impact that it's making. And again, for you, the fear of speaking in public, or let's say being vulnerable, whatever it may be for you, like that feeling may not ever go away. But is that really the important thing? I think there's something that's probably more valuable to you than how you're feeling inside. If that's the case, I need you to focus on that more so than in temporary emotion. And then lesson number 5, an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced force, which is again Newton's first law. So this is Coach Wells. Thank you for making it to episode 100 with me, and I look forward to making it to episode 200 with you guys in the near future. All right, later.